When I was in high school, I had this moment in my development where I got really serious about faith and Christianity, like you're really digging into it. So I wanted to study, I wanted to read, I asked tons of questions. There was a season in there I may have made some Sunday school teachers quit. I just asked so many questions, like I'm sure smoke was coming out of their ears. And I got to a place in my question asking and answer finding that I would ask people, like, okay, well, what's next? And they're like, well, I guess you just need to go to Bible college or something, because like they're just done with me. And so I ended up as a freshman in college going to Bible college in Dallas. And I had this moment, even if you didn't go to Bible college or that wasn't kind of your lane, tell me if you remember the season of life where you knew everything. You remember that? I went in thinking I'm just going to maybe learn 2 or 3 more things and just be done with it. How much more deep is this well of faith? At some point, it's just all the facts and then you move on. And surprise to me, one of the first things that happened when I went into Bible college is they kind of take a fluency test, like how much of Christianity do you know? I'm like, I'm going to ace this. Come on. I didn't, y'all. It was a really low score, and I was surprised. I was surprised by how much I didn't know, and that kind of caught me off guard. I didn't make great grades in high school or college for that matter. My wife can attest to that. But I didn't really learn how to study or anything in high school because I didn't think I was going to need to study in college. It turns out, y'all, it gets harder. The farther along you go, the harder things get. But I was so sure that I knew what I knew. I was so sure that I knew more than they were going to teach me that I wasn't prepared for the reality that there was a whole world beyond my blind spot. There was a whole category of things that I could study, that I can grow in and I can learn. And what I've learned, and I tend to agree with kind of our ancient saints from hundreds of years ago, is that this well is infinite. It's deeper than I will ever be able to find by the end of my life. And I just wonder, have you ever been in a situation where you wanted to improve or you thought you knew everything only to find out you need someone who's been farther along than you? If you've ever entered into that space where you're starting to think about retirement, or you're starting to think about who's going to take care of your family whenever you stop working, that sort of season, you might think, oh, I need to put away money, I need to save money. But that's a lot harder to talk about if that's all you know. You require someone in the financial world to be like, well, here's what a 401k is. I'm like, that's not even a word. That doesn't spell anything, 401k. I don't know what that is. You need someone in the financial world that's an expert who can take you farther along than you would go on your own. If you've ever decided, hey, today's the day, this is the year I'm going to get healthy, I'm going to lose weight, or I'm going to get my blood pressure under control. Having that desire is, that's a big part of the battle, but everybody knows that first day you start trying, you're like, what am I even doing? How many carrots do I have to eat before that blood pressure drops? And then what do we need to do? We need to go talk to an expert who knows something about it, who can take us farther than we would go ourselves. And this is true in all categories. This is true in relationships. This is true in, I want to rebuild my marriage, or this is true in, I want to be a better father, or I want to be a better mother. This is true in your career. There's a ceiling that you will hit in your career that it requires you to take some kind of mentorship program, some kind of leadership training program to get to the next phase. Why? Because in every category of life, there is always somewhere else you can grow, but it requires us to have someone who's beyond our blind spot to pull us forward. So here's the question I want to try to begin answering this week, is why do we think that our spiritual life is any different than every other category of our life? Why is it that so many people come to the conclusion that I've grown as much as I can grow, or I know as much as I will ever know, I don't need to grow anymore, I don't need to develop anymore, I can just coast? In the health world, if I coast, I put on weight, I become diabetic. In the financial world, if I coast, I become bankrupt. I don't put in savings. In the relationship world, if I coast, my wife will start writing me letters like, where have you been lately? I'm like, oh, I thought we were good. We went on a date 4 months ago. No, that coasting doesn't work in any other category of life. why would it work in our spiritual life? We're going to begin a series today that I'm calling the 4 Doors of Discipleship, finding your pathway to spiritual growth. And my hope and my desire is that you and I would maybe have a little bit of the veil pulled back. We might not, at the end of this, learn everything we need to learn. Actually, I'm not even trying to do that. I'm not trying to teach everything we need to learn. How pompous would that make me? What I'm trying to do is open up for us eyes to have a category, 4 categories to be specific, that we can be growing in, that we can be developing in. And if you're blind to any of these 4, you might fall into a couple of different traps. You might think that you currently have all of the Christian life that there is to have. That's not true. Until you're dead, and maybe not even then. I'm convinced that even after we're like with the Lord in heaven, we're continuing to develop. But at least until you die and we have your funeral, you are still growing as a believer, or at least potentially could be. 2, you might not have been taught or spiritually formed in ways that reveal to you all the different ways that someone can grow. If you are an athlete and the coach who was teaching you to work out is like, hey man, you just have to do the bench press. You just have to do the bench press. Skip leg day, you don't need it. Eventually, you look weird, okay? You look like some roid freak with these little twig legs. Why? Because you skipped leg day, but you had a coach, a teacher who was telling you you didn't need that. And then later you come to find out that the greatest way you're going to continue developing athletically is to no longer skip that leg day, and you have to start from scratch. You're super developed in your upper body. You have the biceps, you have the triceps, you have the shoulders, but your legs are like beginning. They haven't started. You might find in your Christian life, as we kind of work through this series, that there are areas of your development that you are really, really good at. Some of you could teach Sunday school classes, but whenever you get alone with your thoughts and it's just you and the Lord, you are terrified. Like that's the leg day being missed. And so I just want to explore that a little bit. Either you're growing or declining, developing or undeveloping in, I think, these 4 categories. So before I explain the 4, I just want to answer the question, why? Why does it matter? Is this going to be like a race? Like, are you trying to beat your spouse and becoming more spiritually mature? Some of you are like, I already won that one. So, I mean, what's next? Is there going to be a report card at some point? No one's going to grade you. It's not like the Lord is waiting for you to pass the spiritual test. Is this going to be like some kind of a exit exam or no, it's none of those things. The truth is this. If you don't put your hand on the wheel of your spiritual formation, you're going to be spiritually formed anyway. We're all being spiritually formed and have been spiritually formed. There are things inside of our soul, inside of our being, inside of the inner workings of who we are that have been placed there either by us submitting to the Lord or because we've been discipled by the world to be bitter in a certain way, to be more political than we should be, to step out and maybe respond in anger. I'm going to get mine. Where do those things come from? They come from what's already formed us. And so this is important, not because there's a race or because there's a report card or because the Lord's going to love you more if you do these things. All of that's nonsense. It's important because if we don't put our hands on the wheel, we might be spiritually malformed. More than we like, more than we want to. So what I want to do as we begin, I'm going to be in Matthew 23 if you want to turn there. And I want to introduce to you really the bad guys of the Bible, the Pharisees and the scribes. If you're new to church, that's going to be just like, who are these guys? But for most people, if you hear me say, hey, let's talk about the Pharisees and the scribes, you think what, good guys or bad guys? Yeah, everybody thinks bad guys, and that's fair. To be clear, I'm not going to change your mind on that. They are the bad guys. They are the ones who are like, hey, Jesus is a problem. What do you guys want to do? You guys want to talk to him? No, let's just have somebody murder him. That was their plan. That's how they responded to it. And so to be clear, they definitely are the bad guys. But just like our movies today, our bad guys have a sympathetic leaning in our movies today. Like Thanos, like he definitely wanted to ruin half of the universe, but he had a good reason, right? Like there was something right about the way he was thinking. Some of you are not Marvel fans, but that's okay. That's all right. We'll disciple you on that later. The Pharisees and the scribes, or / Sadducees, if you want to call them that, they are the bad guys, but they come from a good place. They have good desires. Here, let me tell you some things about them before we move on and read what we're going to read. They are the smartest people in the Bible. By our standards, they are PhD level graduated. They're the ones who had the most education, who have studied the most. Specifically, they've studied the ways of God the most. They want to know what makes God happy, how can they please him, and how can they teach others to live a holy life. They are the ones who kind of set up the standards. If you had a Bible question, would you go to your neighbor who's been a farmer for the last 30 years, or would you go to this PhD Pharisee and ask them? Well, you would go to the smartest person you know. They literally did want to please the Lord. They literally did want others to follow the Lord, but something has happened in their own formation as an entire group that has twisted their desire from being that which would point people to the Lord to that which is actually pointing them in the opposite direction, yet they didn't even know it. If you asked them, they would say, we're doing our very best to live holy lives and to call other people to holiness. That's the conversation that Jesus had with a Pharisee named Nicodemus. He was completely confused by the things that Jesus was saying. And so what we're going to see is that the Pharisees, the scribes, they are bad people, but it's not because they chose to be bad. They're not like Sith lords trying to take over the universe. Okay, so you don't like Marvel, you don't like Star Wars. I'll work through the rest of the Disney intellectual properties. They're the kind of wrong that's a dangerous kind of wrong. They're the kind of wrong that thinks that they are right. They are the kind of wrong that looks right to other people. They are the kind of wrong that others want to believe is right and others are following because it's the closest thing to right that we have. And yet what Jesus says over and over again is that their version of right is leading people to destruction. And if it's true that in the days of Jesus that there was religious sounding people that believed that they were right and others believed that they were right but were leading them to destruction, do you think that we're exempt from that? Do you think that this is just a first century problem? I think that this is an every century problem. So we're going to start in Matthew 23. We're going to see what Jesus has to say to them. Just to set up Matthew 23, the Gospel of Matthew is one of 4 stories about the life of Jesus through his crucifixion into his resurrection. And chapter 23 is close to the end. So Matthew only has 28 chapters. So we've met the Pharisees several times in the book of Matthew. Jesus has interacted with them several times in the book of Matthew. And here's what Jesus says beginning in verse 1. He says, then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. What he's saying as he opens up what is going to be a really negative thing about the scribes and Pharisees is, let's be clear, it is their responsibility to teach you what Moses taught you. They sit in Moses' seat. That is to say, they have spiritual authority to teach you the ways of the Lord. Listen to them. It's a sign of respect. Jesus, this is actually a great lesson for us on how to disagree with people. Jesus has the ability to disagree. The rest of the chapter really is him disagreeing with them, but it begins with this position of respect. I respect who you are. Pharisees and scribes, they're the ones who are supposed to be teaching us the ways of the Lord. So respect that. Verse 3, here's what he says. He says, so do and observe whatever they tell you. They're teaching you scriptures, they're teaching you the Bible, do and observe all the things that they tell you, but not the works that they do, for they preach, but do not practice. Now, Jesus is saying this in a public setting. There's Pharisees and scribes in there, and he begins with saying, hey, they're respectful. They sit on the seat of Moses, do everything that they teach you, and they're, yeah, amen, the Pharisees and scribes, but don't do the things you see them doing, because they're not even doing the things that they teach. Hey, hold on just a second. What are you saying there, Jesus? Jesus is starting to point out that there is there is definitely a separation between what they say out of their mouth that they believe and how they are acting in reality. He continues in verse 4. What are some of the things that they are doing wrong? Verse 4, he says, they tie up heavy burdens that are hard to bear and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. The first problem that Jesus has with these people is that the rules that they are developing are heavier than the rules that the Lord has developed. Have we ever been in like a religious setting, a church setting? Have you ever been, taught in a way that the rules that someone was teaching us was greater than, heavier than anything that the Lord has said in scriptures? I can think of a dozen. Let's continue. That was his problem with them. Verse 5, he says, they do all their deeds to be seen by others. This is a second problem with them. He's like, everything that they're doing it so that you will see what they do. He says, for they make their, what a great word this is, their phylacteries. They make their phylacteries broad. That is the head scarf thing, okay? And so in Hebrew, the word is talit. It's like a tent that they put their head in. And when it was time to pray, if you were super religious, you would take this talit or phylactery off of your shoulders, put it on your head. And when you would see someone like praying in their scarf, you're like, wow, that guy, Bill, religious. That's the most spiritual thing. And so in the middle of an argument, this brother's like, phylactery. And so they would make them bigger and bigger to make a greater show. And it says, in their fringes long. In the book of Numbers, there was this time where they sent spies into the land. And when they came back, 10 of them were like, hey, we're not going to do what the Lord said. And as judgment for that, one of the things that the Lord did, he says, you know what? I want you to start having little tassels hanging from your shirts. And that's going to remind you that the ways of the Lord are more important. Why is that? Because when you're wandering around in the desert, you don't want little strings picking up burrs and sticks and twigs all the time, right? And so it was kind of a judgment on them. So they had to obey the Lord, and they put these little tassels on their shirt. And it wasn't pleasant because every day you're like picking burrs out of it and stickers. And so what's happened is they've taken that symbol of judgment and they twisted it to make it more religious. I'm going to make my strings longer. And so you have these people with long strings, big boxes on their head. It says, and they love the place of honor at feasts and best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplace and being called rabbi by others. They love their title. They love their seat. They love their respect. They love to look religious. The second thing that Jesus says is that they're substituting true spiritual depth for religious symbols that you can see. Everything that they were doing was for the benefit of the applause of the people around them. So you would see, oh, Bill, and he's like, man, I just want to grow up to be like Bill. But all the while, nothing good is happening in Bill. In his heart, he's not growing in the Lord. So skip to verse 11. He says this. Jesus says, the greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. This whole section, Jesus' problem with the people, the servants of the Lord that were supposed to teach them the ways of the Lord, is that they're too big about making themselves look good instead of actually helping people follow the Lord. And so what we see here is that what these people are doing, it looks right, religiously right, but it's producing the wrong kinds of things in people. Now, if this were true of you, if you lived in that day, would you want someone to show up on the scene to correct this? Or would you rather live in ignorance? There's something satisfying, there's something securing about believing beyond any shadow of doubt, I am right despite what anybody else says. But do you want to feel right? Do you want to just believe that you're right? Do we want to actually grow in depth? Do we want to grow in health, in spiritual health? What Jesus does next is nothing short of really signing his own death warrant, because we're right, as far as Matthew is concerned, we're right before the crucifixion, we're right before the plan to crucify him develops. And Jesus sits back and he pronounces 7 woes upon the Pharisees and the scribes. He goes down a list of 7 things that he says they're doing wrong and they're leading people to destruction. They're leading them to hell. Now, I know not many of you, if any of you, are Jewish. Just know this, that if a Jewish man's like, hey, I've got 2 problems with you, it's probably just a conversation. If they have 5 problems with you, it's a longer conversation. But when they start using religious numbers like 7, they're going for like exclamation point. He has 7 problems with you, and let me list them out. And here's what they are. Number 1, the Pharisees, they block the path that leads to the Lord. Look at verse 13. He says, but woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces, for you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in. The first wrong method of spiritual formation is that they're blocking the path that leads to the Lord. There are people in this crowd that are wanting to get to the Lord, wanting to follow him, and their position is actually slamming the door in their face. Have you ever had the door slammed in your face? Have you ever been offended that the guy in front of you didn't hold the gas station door open long enough? And you're like, hey, buddy, you slammed the door in my face. Imagine Imagine if the only way to get to heaven is to make it into church, which is not true. And then I stood at the door of the church. I'm like, hey, you guys want to come to church? Yeah. Well, too bad. And I'll wrap a big chain around the door and I locked it. He says, Pharisees, scribes, that's exactly what you're doing. You're slamming the door on the face of people that want to be close to the Lord. Number 2, they work hard to point people in the wrong way. He says in verse 15, he says, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. He'll say that every line, by the way. What a great, about the third time you repeat this, you're like, man, Jesus is really going at him. He says, for you travel across sea and land to make a single proselyte, that is a convert. And when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. He says, you're working really hard to disciple people and you're doing it, except you make them worse than you are. You make them twice a child of hell as you are. If we have been spiritually formed in the wrong direction and we disciple someone to live our kind of life, then we are going to cause them to grow in the wrong direction. The third woe, the third problem Jesus has with their spiritual formation is that they make up a bunch of rules that mislead people. I'm going to jump through this, but it'll be verses 16 through 22. And there's all these things that they were doing about swearing. Have you ever been like, hey, listen, it's going to rain tomorrow. I swear on my dog's grave or something like that. You know that kind of swearing? It's not cuss words, okay? They had a rule. You're not allowed to swear against the temple. And they created a loophole around that rule. It's like, well, I didn't swear on the temple. I swear on the rocks that made the temple and the gold that's in, that little gold thing right there. I didn't swear on the temple. I swear on the gold of the temple. And Jesus is like, it's nonsense. Like, why are you making these loopholes? Like that makes you somehow, you don't think God thought about that as he worked through it? They had these weird rules that they would make up. The fourth woe is that they obsess on the smallest details and they miss the main point. They miss the biggest points. Look at verse 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Here's what we're going to do for the next 3 woes. If I point at you, I just want you to yell hypocrites. I think that would be fun. It would feel the energy here. All right, let's try it right now. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Oh, this is going to be fun. For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, which I think that's all the recipe for an awesome taco, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. He says, your religious moves have become the smallest microscopic details, and you're letting people suffer in injustice. It would be like you people who bake, you're sifting the flour and you're like, oh, there's a little piece of black flour. You get that out. But you let just a whole, he uses camel, so I'll use camel. I'm not using anything more disgusting than camel. You let the whole camel make it into your cake, right? But you got the little gnat out. Oh, that's nice. That's nice. He says, your version of religiousness is you're getting the mint tithing right, but you're treating people like they're objects. You've got to do better than this. Number 5, they care more about how things look than how things actually are. He continues, verse 25. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. We'll come back to it. Hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, and the outside also may be clean. Jesus' 5th problem with these people is that they really cared a lot about how the outside of the dish looked, not knowing that you're going to pour the milk on the inside of the cup. Anybody ever pull a dish out of the dishwasher and it's like, oh yeah, we run the dishwasher, it's definitely clean on the outside, and you pour something in it and you got something floating in the top of it because your kid ate cereal out of it? Just my house? Okay. Well, sometimes that happens and you're just the outside was clean, but the inside is disgusting. He says, you are teaching people to care more about how they look on the outside, ignoring the fact that their heart is rotting and they're becoming more and more desperate on the inside. Jesus wants us to be clean both on the inside and the outside. You don't want dirty dishes on either side. One time I was at a restaurant, I was halfway through a whole cup of water. I think I was going for the refill and I realized there's lipstick on my cup of water. It was disgusting. It made me feel feelings I didn't want to feel. I was anger and no longer hungry, not because I was full. And Jesus is saying spiritually, that's what's happened here. All right, you guys get ready. We got one more, number 6 here. They look good on the outside, but they're rotting on the inside. Verse 27, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Wonderful. For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. He says, you're like the cleanest looking tomb of death anybody's ever seen. Marble, it's polished, you look great, but on the inside, you're smelling kind of nasty. You got something wrong with you on the inside, and you know it. And you convince others that your way is right. Instead of the Pharisees asking for help, instead of the Pharisees looking for the guide, they were more apt to convince others, I am spiritually okay, and you should be like me. And Jesus has a problem with that. The seventh, I'll skip for the sake of time, but it says that they pretend to honor the Lord's messengers, but they're ignoring their message. What Jesus says in the next few verses is that you go around and you have all these religious events, you're celebrating stuff like, Passover, you're decorating the tombs of the prophets, and you're pretending that you wouldn't be one of the people who tried to kill the prophets in the crowd. Anytime we read Bible stories, we're always like, I'm on the good guy's side. You never think that you're in the crowd who would have been shouting, no, give me the other guy, give me Barabbas. He's telling them, like, your heart is exactly the same as those who killed the prophets before you, but you like to do religious celebrations. So these are the 7 woes. They block the path that leads to the Lord. They work hard to point people the other way. They make up rules that mislead people. They obsess on the smallest details, but they miss the big ones. They care more about how things look than how things are. On the inside, they're rotten, but on the outside, they look good. And they pretend to honor the Lord's messengers, but they ignore his message. And Jesus says that is causing you to form in a wrong way. They became twisted. Of a twisted version of what they were called to be. And the most dangerous thing about it is they didn't even know it. Church, if we were twisted, or if we had a way that we could be better, healthier, church, if we could grow in the Lord healthier, would we want to? They needed someone to show up on the scene to show them a better way. And so Jesus shows up. What I'm about to describe are some ways in which you and I can grow in the Lord. But I want to be clear about one element of this. The list of do's and don'ts, they are just things you can do unless the Lord has transformed you, unless you've been born again, to use the language of the Lord. This is not these are not things that you add to your life to look good. These are things that join the Holy Spirit in his work in helping form us. Does Jesus want to form us? Well, here's how he ends his whole complaint against these Pharisees. This chapter ends with this, verse 37. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Jesus was willing to rescue them from this, but they were not willing to submit to him. What we're going to do, we're going to move. I'm going to talk about 4 steps, these 4 doors, but we're going to talk about it working through these three premises. One is this: the Lord wants to gather you, he wants to protect you, and he wants to form you. This is his desire. He's not this God who sets up a test. Your life is not a test where you prove to him that you figured it out. That's a different religion. That's not Christianity. Christianity is the Lord joins you in forming you and making you more into his image. You were meant to be in the image of the Lord, but by our own sin and malformation of the world, our image has become broken. And our quest, our walk in following the Lord today, your hope in even being in church right now is that you would look more like Jesus as a result of it, that we are becoming more like him. So the first premise is that we're just going to trust the Lord for a moment. We're going to trust that the Lord knows better, that the Lord can speak to us, and the Lord can get our attention on things that he wants to. The second premise is this, is that there are ways of being wrong that look right. We can be convinced in our rightness, or we can see churches that are convinced in their rightness, and it's possible that it's leading people in a slightly askewed way. If you've ever been lost in the woods, it doesn't take much to get in a very wrong place. You can be 1 degree off of the direction you're supposed to go, but if you walk that way long enough, you are a long distance away from where you intended to be. So we're going to be humble, church. We're going to be curious. We're going to ask questions about ourselves and of the Lord. The third premise is this, is that I believe that most people have a desire to grow in Christ-likeness. When I talk to people who are unbelievers, they're not followers of the Lord, they want to be nicer to their spouse, they want to be more honest, they want to do less things that are negative, and they want all of these Christ-like behaviors. We're not going to get Christ-likeness until we confess Jesus as Lord, but then we can grow in that. So we're going to assume right intentions with everyone. Back in 2022, I began thinking through how we form here at Carpenters Way. What is our discipleship process? What are our spiritual formation practices? I wanted to articulate that. I reviewed it. I looked at all the different things we do. We have Sunday mornings here. We have community groups there. We have men's and women's ministries that are meeting. There's Bible studies happening at different times. So what I wanted to do is look at all those tools and try to compile, like, okay, what's our system? I started reading books. I have a list of books here. I forgot to make the slide for it. I would recommend every one of these books. They're great books on discipleship and what it means to grow in the Lord. If you're interested in that, ask me. I'll give them to you. But none of them had a framework for how all of these things fit together. It was just like, here's a tool. It's like handing someone a hammer and being like, go and make a house. It's like, yeah, but I need a plan for the whole house. Well, here's a hammer, and then you read another book about a saw, and here's a book about a screwdriver. Okay, where's the book that puts all these tools together? That's what I'm looking for, and I could not find it. So I started looking through scriptures, and I would write down every time I found a passage in the Bible that was prescriptive. Prescriptive meaning it told you like how to behave or how to be or how to live as a result of the cross. I ended up early on with a list of like 50 or so. Here's a few of them. Mark 12, Jesus says, the most important is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Jesus is saying, hey, if you're going to do this right, you got to love God, you got to love people. So there's got to be a way to describe this that goes in both directions. I'm going to skip the next few of these, Charlie, but in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has a lot to say about who you are really on the inside versus on the outside. So many of us do things because the best we can do is just like put on a good shirt and like look nice, but the Lord wants to transform our inner self. You can look through the book of James for like every other verse is do this, act this way. And here's what I noticed. After I started writing these down is that I could group them into 4 categories. And these are going to be the 4 doors that I want to begin looking at next week, okay? The 4 doors are as follows: dwell, give, gather, and grow. Here's what I mean by dwell. Dwell centers on developing and nurturing a personal relationship with God by fostering intimacy, identity, and aligning one's heart with His will. Dwell is who you actually are between you and the Lord in the quiet spaces when you're alone with your thoughts. Many of us, myself included, find this to be one of our weakest areas where it's just like, I don't know how to be alone with Him. I wouldn't even know where to begin. And so another way of wording this is who you have been, currently are, and are becoming on the inside matters to the Lord. It's not about the steps that we do. It's not your attendance. It's not about knowing the right things. It's who we actually are becoming on the inside. And so we're going to learn and talk about how to dwell with the Lord and look at some practical ways to do that. The second is give. And by give, what I mean is this, is that give focuses on joining the Lord in His kingdom work by developing and applying our resources, gifts, and talents in response to His generosity. Give is our way to participate in what the Lord is doing in the universe, to reconcile the universe back to Himself. Do you know where your place is on the map? If the Lord's desire is that this entire community would confess Jesus as Lord, do you know what your part in that is to play? If you don't, then we need to grow in this idea of giving. Another way of saying this is how and why you participate with the Lord matters. Some of us are just like, well, I financially give money to make God happy, I think, because I'm supposed to. Or I serve on a team because I learned as a child, my only value is how much I'm contributing to a thing. Those motivations are malforming us. The motivation is that as we see how generous the Lord has been in our life, as we see what the Lord is trying to do in our family, in our community, we join Him in that. So we're going to explore that together on 2 weeks from now. Gather is the third one, the third door. And this emphasizes the Lord's longing for His people to desire and to live in unity. What we're doing in here right now, this space, is this gathering space. The Lord desires that people who call upon the name of Jesus would live in unity with each other. Not just attend church and check that box now and go get my groceries. It is to actually learn that we're from different sides of the world, but he's calling us to be one person, to follow him in unity with like-mindedness, to lift one another up, to bear one another's burdens. You can't do that by watching a live stream at home. We continue to offer a live stream, but be clear, it is a substitute for what it is, the holy moment of just gathering in a church and growing with the people that you're sitting shoulder to shoulder with, that we're growing in the same direction. Another way to say that is this: who you are to your tribe and who your tribe is to you matters. The fourth door is grow. And grow highlights the Lord's transformative work in lives as believers actively align with biblical teaching, deepen their understanding with God, and reflect Christ's character. Here's what grow implies: we don't know everything. There's some way that we can learn a new thing about the Lord. There's another way that we can align to his will. There's a way that we can submit to what we know he's teaching us to. And so we grow by surrendering to him the outcomes and whatever may come. I'm taught to forgive my enemies, but what if my enemy abuses me as a result of that? And the answer is, well, that's up to the Lord. I'm going to abandon the outcome of whatever happens to the Lord because I'm going to grow here. I'm not going to carry this unforgiveness around because the Lord taught me to. Another way to say that is who you are becoming and choosing to become matters. One of my favorite cartoons is the movie WALL-E. Has anybody seen WALL-E? Has anybody not seen WALL-E? Let's start with that because I'm about to do some spoiler stuff, okay? In my defense, it's 17 years old. So if you don't know how this movie ends, that's between you and Disney. In the movie WALL-E, if we can put the picture of WALL-E up, there's some kind of big disaster. We've tanked the world, the earth, and so all of humanity hops on a spaceship and flies away. WALL-E ends up on the spaceship, and when he gets there, he finds these extra large people. And what's happened is that when they left, they were physically fit and they were determined. We're going to be gone for a small amount of time and then we're going to come back. But the leaders on there started to kind of twist things, and generation after generation, they forgot who they were. And so they slowly, after generations, formed into this. They went from being soldiers to they can't walk anymore. In the end of the movie, spoiler alert, sorry if I'm ruining this for anybody, the end of the movie is someone deciding, I see now what we were supposed to become, and I'm ready to fight for that. And so you have this wheezing guy trying to fight a robot. He's like, I'm getting control of this ship right now. And he turns the thing around and he does put his hand on the wheel. And it was hard, but he does that. Here's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that many of us in different ways have and can become spiritually malformed, and then we're terrified because the work to undo it is more than we're willing to put in. Here's the promise that I'm going to make, that as a church, you should be able to trust the church that you partner with to help form you and to join you with whatever difficult thing may come. You are not following the Lord alone. But by design, if there's any blind spots, it is going to be uncomfortable. The Lord is calling us to what will become our highest calling. We were called to be formed into his image. And so as we become more and more deeply formed in his image, I want to encourage you, you are not too old to try something new in following the Lord. You are not too far gone. You haven't wandered off so far that he can't bring the sheep back to the fold. You are not too new in following the Lord to grow in these ways. There's nothing that you've done that pulls you off this track too far. So let me ask this question. This is a real question. If your goal is to grow in the Lord, what is your plan for doing that? What is your first step? I would encourage you don't have to yell it out, obviously, but I would encourage you actually answer that to yourself. Because if your answer is, I can't think of it, then you need a guide. If your answer is, well, I'm going to do this thing, and it turns out to be the thing you've been doing for the last 20 years, you need a guide to tell you, hey, let's stop skipping leg day. So let's stop going to the thing that we're comfortable with, and let's try something new. I believe that the Lord is calling us to be fully formed disciples of Jesus in every domain of our life. So which of the 4 doors do you want to try? Which of the 4 are new to you? Which of the 4 are you strongest in? Consider those things. Because where have you seen yourself grow in the Lord throughout your life? What have you seen him do as a result. I would invite you, as we close out, to pray over that question. Maybe draw a map. If you were here during the prayer service on Wednesday, we had a station that had a map. I printed some of these out. If you just want to, as an exercise, just draw a spiritual map outlining how you've seen the Lord grow you, this will help you begin this process of growing as a disciple of Jesus. So we have a stack of these down here. Pray with me as we close out, and I hope that you'll join us for the rest of this as we begin to... I don't speak sign language. I hope you'll join us as we see how the Lord wants to grow us in the Lord. Father, we come to you in the name of Jesus. We ask that you will form us, that you will pull back any blinders that we have. Father, if there's any way in which you are calling us to grow, but we've just assumed that you weren't, Lord, that you would speak loudly and we would hear you. Lord, help us join you in becoming more like your image, becoming more like your Son. I pray that you would help us grow in the name of Jesus. Amen.